Well, good evening again. I'm Bob Graves, and they call me the Unconventional Pastor. And it's good to be back with you again on this Wednesday night. And looks like my phone wants to ring off the hook already. I have no idea who that is. But I can't take it. I can't take that. Anyway, isn't that an awful thing? Yeah. But it's a call that's going to be important. I'm just going to have to get it later. And I'm going to. There we go. Sorry about that. See, it shows you how live this can be. Now, tonight, I wanted to talk about something that I've often spoken about in other contexts other than on a broadcast like this, and that is the concept of how we how we come to know who we are. And I've given this talk a number of times, and I gave the talk the title, "Just Who do you think you are?" And not to get huffy and puffy about it, but the truth is, it's really a very good question. Who do you think you are? How did you come to understand yourself? Did you make any mistakes as you came to those conclusions? Do you really possess the skills required to know yourself in a manner that is honest, that is authentic, that really is helpful and beneficial to you? Or did you come to know yourself and think of yourself in a way that really kind of sabotages who you are? And how would you know? And does everybody need a therapist? And questions such as this. And I remembered early on, of course, this was a very important question to me because the person that I thought I was basically a person that was in many ways self-destructing. And it wasn't working, and it was based very much upon my family of origin, of course, and a very hypercritical father, and a very distant mother who, is a process of all that growing up. I came to think of myself in a certain way that affected my behavior and the way that I related to myself and the way that I related to others, and it took me a while to discover this isn't working. And it's not working just because I'm no good. It's working because my concept is false. It's erroneous. It's a wrong concept. So I began looking at, well, where did this concept come from? And not just, how did I make the mistake, but how does anybody come to understand who they are, either in a healthy or an unhealthy way? And as a result of my studies in that area, I found it so fascinating that I eventually went back to college again for the fourth time, and that's when I got a degree in human development, and loved it. I've been to college too often. Of course, I go to college almost every day now that I'm teaching there. But anyhow, so let's talk tonight a little bit about how does your self-awareness develop? Where does it come from? For the Christian, we often want that self-awareness to somehow be founded in Christ. And we often thought that we would find that in church or in our theology. I want you to know that although I do think that a healthy self-concept can be very compatible with a sense of God and of Christ, that in my experience has been that most theologies and most religions don't really promote a very good or a very healthy sense of self, or a very authentic one, a very honest one. Most religions tend to give you a sense of self that tries to establish and sustain the religion, not any sense of who you really are. And so, although I think that my own faith has certainly been built up around a sense of self that is a healthy one, I find that my original hope that when I became a much more serious Bible-believing Christian, a part of my goal and hope in it was that I was going to find a way of becoming a healthier, better, more a person, more of who I was really meant to be. And I didn't find that happening. And it wasn't until I began to explore this in other ways, other than just through my faith, that I came to understand myself in a very, very different way. And it radically changed me in many, many ways. Now, Before I get too deep into this, I want to tell you this. Just who do you think you are? And can you ever know this with accuracy and be perfect in your knowledge of self? I don't think so. And I don't think you even need to. You can never know yourself perfectly, and you don't need to. Oh, we got comments going already. Um, Move into your right, please. At least 6 to 12 inches. Okay, that's the producer. I'm according to my camera. I appear to be right there in the center. So let me know if that's okay. We'll try that. For some reason, I'm much further over than I normally would be. But let's see how that goes. Is that okay, Joey? Just give me a yup. Anyhow, knowing who you are perfectly, is that possible? It's not possible, and it's not even necessary. And there's many reasons why it's not possible to know who you are perfectly. I can't imagine the kind of effort it would take to actually try to do anything like that. Besides, who you are, who you actually are, even if you don't know it, is something that is constantly fluctuating. You're growing. You're gaining experience. Some things about you are falling away. Some things about you are emerging and coming out for the very first time. And this is such an ongoing process that not even the healthiest person knows what all of these things are. But beyond that, also, is the fact that here's something that a lot of people have a lot of difficulty grasping, and that is this. I believe in absolute reality, but I do not believe there is a single human being alive who's in touch with absolute reality. So, for all practical purposes, there is no such thing as absolute reality. Well, for all practical purposes, all is perception. Everything we have is processed through a biosemiotic perception. That at first sounds kind of scary when we begin to realize that you're not in touch with reality. I'm not in touch with reality. Nobody is in touch with reality. At first, that may sound a little scary, but there's actually some pretty good news in that. If you're not really in touch with reality, and you know that you're not really in touch with reality, then this lets you know that your concept of yourself is either representative of that reality or it's way off. But since you know it's not reality itself, this allows you to let go because for us, experience of reality seems so solid and so certain that we feel many times like I have to deny my experience if I'm going to deny that I am who I think I am. And if who I think I am is not healthy, is not working for me, learning to let go of that is difficult when it has so much credibility. But when I realize that everything I know or think I know is the result of a process of reduced perception, and that reality is something I don't even have contact with directly, it allows me so much more easily to just let go of the lies and to consider other possibilities and grow comfortable with the idea of being in a finite process of self. And this is, for me, it was a very, very healthy discovery because I had a lot of damaging, self-sabotaging concepts of myself that really had to go. And it was difficult to let go of them until I realized that I'm not trading an illusion for reality. I'm trading a misperceived, misorganized distortion for something that's a little more representative, or at least more useful in my sense of self in dealing in terms of reality. And so that can make it a lot easier. So you don't even have to know yourself perfectly. The healthiest person alive doesn't even know themselves that way. Reality is for us then not just a perception, but a concept. Now, reality isn't a concept, but our awareness of it is built on concepts. That may be difficult to understand. Sometimes you say, well, we shouldn't use labels. You may not realize this. It is impossible to be an intelligent human being and not use labels. Labels are the way we organize the significance of things, even if those labels are not words. Everything we value, everything we know, everything we are familiar with is organized in the brain in some sort of with some sort of signifier. That signifier is a label. That signifier might even be a word, but it's not possible for the human brain to operate outside of those conceptual signifiers. It's just part of the way the brain organizes things. And so when we talk about the damage that labels can do, and they can do damage, the answer is not to do away with labels. You may think you've done that, but you can't. The answer is to recognize the limits and use and purpose of such signifiers, of such labels, and what purpose they serve and what purpose they don't, and start using them for what they actually are useful for, and stop using them for the things they're not. But the more you realize what they are and how they work and how useful they are and are not, the easier it is for you then to work with them. And this includes recognizing that since you're not in touch with reality, you're in touch with perception. It's a process and it's based upon concepts. This helps you to deal with it a little more robustly, a little more flexibly, a little more humbly, and lets you give up these problems of complexity and certainty. Now, we actually had a guest on one of the programs with at the place who was talking about chaos theory. And one of the interesting things about chaos theory, when first people hear about chaos theory, they think that it's a theory about how everything is just a jumbled mess and nothing makes any sense and can't, and because it's all just random stuff. But that's really not what chaos theory is all about. What chaos theory is all about is this: the order of the universe, as much sense as it makes, as it were, to itself, is so complex, and there are so many variables and so many dynamics interrelated that it's just way too much for any human being to keep track of. And so, therefore, it is overwhelmingly complex. And since the universe is overwhelmingly complex, since reality is overwhelmingly complex, the only way we can deal with it is by reducing it to a more manageable representation of itself. This is why we use problems and shortcuts and labels and things like that, why things have to take on signifiers. Now, it therefore means that the fact that we must organize the world, the universe, and even our sense of self into some sort of conceptual tree, some sort of conceptual building that we create. This means that our development can be aided or impeded by the concepts we're developing. These concepts can become very, very powerful, but it also means that we can give the concepts that we have of ourselves tremendous credibility, and we need to be careful about that. This is, I think, even more of a problem in our modern day than it was in ancient days. In the ancient world, technology was sufficiently rough that people were honestly and genuinely aware of the fact that there was a lot to life we didn't understand. And so consequently, there was this room and ability to have even a sense of self that was as easily difficult to understand, and why some of the scholars who thought things through clearly were so admired, because they were doing so in a context of academics that was difficult to pursue. But today we have science. Today we have mathematics. Today we have measurable data, and we have so many things going on for us that we live in a world where there's a great deal we've been able to nail down to the floor. And we would like to think that we can do this with everything we know and everything we feel and everything we believe and everything we see. I would even want to argue that the fighting going on between faith and science is in some ways the jealousy of the community of faith, because of the fact that science seems to have so much going for it in terms of certainty. And faith is really based on a leap, um, going out in the direction of things that cannot be verified. In some sense, it's dealing with those aspects of life that science can't even understand or deal with, observe, verify, measure, and yet are very central to the sense of self, sense of life, sense of meaning, sense of purpose, and all those things that can never be scientifically reduced. And we would like to think that we can have these things far more certain. And since we live in a world where we try to reduce everything to a certainty, I mean, even the money in your bank account is maintained by the bank to the very penny. We'd like to somehow have a sense of self that we think is down there to that very, very penny. And as a result, it causes us to, I think, overly rely on our sense of self as being totally credible just because it is for us coherent. And that becomes a problem. Now, long time ago, Solomon said, or at least he's credited with having said it, he in the Proverbs, many times he urged us, seek knowledge, seek understanding, look for it like gold, treat it like it were silver. It is wealth to your soul. There was a great deal of insight and wisdom and encouragement to become well educated and widely aware of what's going on in the world. And yet Solomon also is credited with saying, do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, talking about God, and he will direct your paths. Now, that's not a proper translation, but the idea being there in that section of Scripture that we're not told to lean on God's understanding, is the way some people put it. This is why I trust the theology, what the Bible tells me, instead of what makes sense to me. And that's not what the verse is talking about. The verse is talking about getting understanding and knowledge and everything, but realizing that because of limits, you can't lean on it. You can have it, you can consider it, but in the end, you really don't want to lean on things. You need to realize that everything you know is not yet fixed. Everything you know is not yet settled. It really isn't, and it never will be. So don't ever lean on it. And that includes even the things you think you understand from God. They are not yet settled. And so if you get something wrong, you can get it wrong again. And when it comes to trying to understand who we are and come to a better sense of self, we made a number of mistakes the first time through in trying to understand who we are. So that today, as you sit where you are and you think you have a sense of who you are, if we were to go back through your entire life and try to make sense of it in a different way, we don't know that we could guarantee that the sense we'd come to it, even though different, would be any better, any more accurate, any more authentic, do we? I mean, if we can make the mistake the first time, what's going to keep us from making the mistakes again? Well, as true as that is, the truth is today, you're a far more educated person than you were the day you were born. Today, you know a lot more. Oddly enough, do you ever stop to think about this? If there was an event that took place in your life, say when you were 7, and this event really shaped you, and it still shapes you to this day, do you realize that that event is shaping you because of how significant it was to a person who was only 7 years old and who didn't have anywhere near the sophisticated ability to understand self, others, psychology, motivation, need, mistakes, fallacies, as did that 7-year-old kid. And yet you're still living in the impact of that event as it happened when you were 7. And it still feels true to you, even though if that were to happen, if that same event were to happen today, or if you were to view or witness some other 7-year-old going through that same kind of event, and you could see clearly as an adult what a more accurate, more authentic, more honest sense of what is going on in that event, you would be able to advise that younger 7-year-old a far better piece of information than what you gave yourself. And so it is possible to, in some ways, go back over the past and kind of review it, reanalyze it, rethink it. But, what are you going to do? You're going to rethink your entire life, you know? Um, who's got time for that? I don't. Uh, how are you going to ever get the skills to do that? The brain has to reduce everything to a set of concepts. And the thing is this, it's important, and this helped me a lot. I don't know if it's going to help you, but it helped me a lot. When I realized that I turned everything that I observed into something that made sense to me conceptually, and that I could possibly be wrong, I realized something. I realized that when I began to see things in a different way, this was a discovery that, you know what? Perception is like an optical illusion. Because there was a time when certain events in my life made me feel like, well, the reason why this happened to me and the reason why I experienced it the way I do is because this is who I am. But when I came to a different sense of self, the same events are now giving to me a different sense of self. Well, as you can see, the perception before was coherent. Now that it's different, it's still coherent. So evidently, and this was a very freeing thing for me, just because everything you think you know about yourself, just because of everything you think is true about you, your core truths, your deepest sense of self, just because it makes a lot of sense to you and just because it's very coherent, doesn't mean it isn't part of an optical illusion. That is, well, that's one way of looking at it. And when you look at it that way, it seems to all fit, but it's still wrong. It can be that way. And chances are that if you come to an even healthier way of viewing it, that'll still be wrong in some ways. In fact, since reality is always way beyond and far more chaotic and far more complex, you're never going to get it right. So the goal isn't to get it right. The goal is to get it in a way that is workable and authentic and that is more honest and more representative. Now, when I say representative, I'm using something that I actually learned from statistics. When I studied statistics in college, we talked about populations. We talked about opinion polls. The truth is, if you wanted to know what the majority view was of the population about a particular topic, you don't really have to ask everybody. Statistics is a science that shows us that if we can actually create a random sampling of a population, where we can and by a random sample, that means that anybody in the population is as likely to get asked the question as anybody else. And they are truly selected in a manner that can be demonstrated scientifically to be truly random, that we can ask as little as 3% of the population, depending on the size of the population, and still get an answer that is likely to be representative of the entire population within a certain margin of error. And it is amazing. Of course, when you have pollsters who have axes to grind, they're not always asking questions honestly, nor are they always selecting truly random populations. Anyhow, interesting concept. It seems like the viewer comment, the only reason why an optical illusion-based perception of the world around us might work would be because the beings around us are even under a same or at least somewhat similar optical illusion-based perception. Well, this is true. Even Albert Einstein said that reality is an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. Yes. In fact, this is in many ways the definition of a culture. A culture is a group of people who, through anthropological and sociological dynamics, acquire, without realizing it, a very common paradigm in which they operate and in which they offer and give significance to the events that are going on in the culture and in their lives and in their purposes. And so, yeah, and that's why each culture can be slightly different because they happen to organize it differently, and so, yeah, that's a very true and realistic statement. But the more you know this, the more you know that it's based upon a building block of concepts, the easier it is for you to walk out of those concepts when they're not working for you. And I'll tell you, they weren't working for me. There was a time in my life when my sense of self was so self-destructive. I was extremely anxious, very insomniac, and I'd become a deep fundamentalist. But there were so many things going on. It was just so difficult for me to function and to function in a healthy manner. And when I learned to break free from all of that, things turned around in my life radically, and not even through necessarily difficult effort, as it were. Just having a healthier sense of self, a healthier sense of others, a healthier sense of God, a healthier sense of putting these things together. Things just worked so much more easily. So as I learned to deal with things in a manner more representative as to what they are, and realized I don't always have to go along with the crowd. I can be independent if that's going to work for me. Anyhow, the brain, to make sense of things in real time, has to use some things called shortcuts. It really has to. And that is that basically, what I'm saying is that your life gets so complex. So many things are happening. Moment after moment is followed by moment after moment, followed by moment after moment. And by the time you find yourself like me at 61 years of age, I've had a lot of moments in sequence. And all of that history, I don't remember half of it. But the way that I tend to be making sense of it and making sense of myself is by observing those things that strike me as more familiar, more manageable, more coherent, or more useful. And as a result, I've gone through this process that actually is a form of reducing the reality that I'm aware of. So that even though the reality I'm aware of is already a reduction of absolute reality, the reality that I deal with, that makes decisions for me, that makes observations for me, is yet an additional filtered subset of my perceptions. I deal with something I call metaphors of meaning. And that is that I believe that certain events in your life stand out to you for significant reasons. And that not every event in your life stands out the exact same way. Not every event in your life stands out to you as being significant or as having the same significance. And as a result, what I'm saying is this, that as you go through life, occasionally, on occasion, there's this event that when it happens, as the event unfolds, it resonates with you in a way where you say, you know, this event is making me feel like I know who I am. And that's true whether it's making you feel like I'm a loser, or and I'm a winner, or and I'm a musician, or I'm an artist, or I'm a writer, or I'm a speaker. Whatever it is, your sense of self is based upon certain experiences that you have that when they occur, they resonate with you. And those events themselves and your memory of them become for you a metaphor of meaning. If we could find all of the events in your life that stood out as highlights, that were moments you really resonated with, and you don't always stop to think about them. Sometimes they resonate with you and it's powerful, but you're so busy you don't notice it, and it kind of grows up on you after a few days, after a few weeks, and sometimes even after you've necessarily you may have forgotten the specific event clearly. But we all have these significant moments that when, that tell your story. It's kind of like a loser who might go to work, they step in the water and they get their shoes all muddy on their way to work. They maybe get involved in a small little fender bender. They get to work. They get a complaining phone call from some vendor that was some mistake they made, only to find out by mid-noon that their boss has called them in and they get fired. And all of these events add up and they say, well, this is the story of my life. This is who I am. Big loser. Can't do anything right. And that day and its moments might resonate with you. It might make you feel like that's me. And those events stand out to you, whether it's winning or losing or doing well or doing moderately well or whatever it is, just being who it is you think you are. Each of us have these moments that stand out to us. Now, if we were to take all of those moments from your life that really do stand out to you, some of them that are so painful you don't really consciously think about them. So if we were to forget about everything in your life except just those moments and those memories, in those memories of a few significant events, probably less than 20, we could find your complete story of who it is you think you are. Now, the good news in that is that it's these moments that stand out to you, and this means that if there's something unhealthy or not good in your concept of self, you don't have to review your entire life. You don't have to. You can find this information in just those things that stand out and resonate. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how to identify them. And then you can think about them again, and you can go through them again, and you can decide, well, is that really me? Or am I being honest? Am I being fair? Am I being unkind? Am I being ungracious? Am I being too hard on myself? Am I not being hard enough on others? Am I taking too much of the blame? You can ask yourself these questions and get honest about it. We got another viewer comment. This kind of sheds light on why a movie can make us feel like we've witnessed an entire lifetime. Oh, definitely. A good writer knows how to a good script knows how to take an event that appears on the surface to be just a normal flow of events, and yet so much that's going on is highly significant to many lines in the story. This is one reason why good writers know how to build cross sections of themes. For example, um, I've been writing a story, and I haven't gotten back to it. I was in the middle of it, and before the floods, I stopped writing it, and I haven't gotten back to it since the floods. But I was writing a story about a sociologist, and in this story, I'm using the theme of wood. Wood appears in the story in various places, and I don't always point it out, but it's there. And so it's by it always being there, and it's always there in a significant way. This helps the person who reads the story, or someday it gets made into a movie. Wouldn't that be something? If I ever could sell the book. Um, this helps to give it an unusual sense of coherence and fullness. But yeah, I think that this is true, that a well-written movie or well-directed movie will often include scenes that reduce a great deal of the various subsets of stories going on into very significant presences in the including where they are, what the weather is, what objects appear in the periphery, and things like that. They can all be a part of that tries to turn it all into a metaphor of some purpose, some part of the storyline, even some subset of the storyline. Anyhow, we come to this part of our lives where we have to make sense of ourselves out of these metaphoric memories. Now, these metaphors can be harmful, but the quality of your life and its experience depends in a huge way on these experiences, on these memories. And if they're not authentic, or if they're not fair, if they're not honest, then this means that you're living your life with a knee-jerk reaction of a sense of self based upon memories that seem to confirm it, that are selling you short. You don't want to be doing that. And it's good for you to know that this is not just something you've done to yourself. You've actually done this to the entire universe. Yes. Everything you know, whether it's the entire universe or yourself or everything in between yourself and the rest of the universe, is something that you've put together through a process of reduction, memory, significant moments, and events that have happened in your life. Now, before we talk about those events, let's talk about how those events came to make sense to you, because that's also important. Did you know that the moment you were born, this isn't magic. The moment you're born, you come out into the world and everything is there and nothing makes sense. And as we have since discovered by dealing with people who have suffered brain injuries and things like that, your eyes, they see things visually, but your brain has not yet mapped out where everything is. So although your eyes are receiving the light and perhaps even seeing things, something that's over here is not like, it's not as if you see it over there. And something over here, you see it over there. It's not as if your eyes have learned to do that. Your eyes really just have sensory perception in it, and it all goes to the brain. But it's because the eyes are consistent in how the optical nerve works, that something that's located in a specific angle according to your eye will always appear in the same place or affect the same nerves. Eventually, your brain learns to map it out. But a person who suffers a certain kind of brain damage can sometimes have vision, but they can't make sense of anything they see. But over time, the brain remaps. New cells take over and remap it, and then suddenly vision is clear again. And it's not that anything was out of focus; it's that nothing was in its place. Some of you may have actually had thoracic surgery and noticed this, that if you got a cut across the chest or something, and then they sew it back together, that if you drag your finger across the cut, it doesn't seem to go in a straight line. And it feels weird and odd because the nerves are reconnected in a way that isn't the same way they used to be. And as a result, your body doesn't really know where it's being touched. It just knows that it's being touched. But given enough time, the brain learns to remap its sense of where the body's being touched until suddenly it all makes sense again. But as you come into this world, you receive sensory perception. You hear things, you feel things, you see things, you taste things, you smell things, and none of it makes any sense. But the brain learns to organize it. And it learns to organize it and discovers that things can be mapped into some sort of organized sense of things. Eventually, we actually even learn how to pinpoint the directionality of sounds. This is why you can close your eyes, and with only 2 ears, you can still hear three-dimensionally. If you do the math, there's no way you should be able to do that. But it's the brain and its perception, and particularly the shape of the pinna of the ear that aids in this. But it's an interesting concept when you begin to study the audiology of and cognitive perception. But make a long story short, that after you're born, you have developed a way of organizing the sensory perception into a manageable recognition of the external world. Now that you've done that, there's three things that happen that you notice. Things change. Doesn't remain the same. If you're full, you get hungry. If you're hungry and you get full, then you get hungry again. And you go through various changes. Things change. Things in the room change. People change. Day change. Light changes. And various things go on. Now, what happens is this, that when things change, one of the very first things that a baby discovers is that some things are changing for reasons that are unidentifiable. And I don't know that they even think about it as an unidentifiable change. But there are some things that change they become aware of because they changed it. They were conscious of doing something, and then things change. Maybe the baby kicks its legs, and next thing the blanket is off of it. After a while, the baby discovers that its legs have moved. It may take months, but after a while, we become people who become aware of the fact that things change. By the time we're 2 or 3 years old, we've discovered there are three basic things that cause things to change. I make things change. Somebody else makes things change. Things change for reasons I don't understand or know. And those are the basic three ways that most people in a young age organize all of the changes. Now, the problem with that is this. It's really more sophisticated than that, but that's a sufficient reduction for now. But because those are the first three things that we notice, most human beings will live in those three major answers to why something changed for the rest of their lives. At 90, when something changes, they want to know, did I do that? Did you do that? Have we not identified what did that? And that's pretty much the way that they deal with things that change. But more importantly, we find ourselves trying to make sense of the world, and we get to a point where we pick a favorite. That's not a good idea. Instead of attributing change to actual verifiable causes, we tend to pick a theme that becomes the default. And each of us can do this differently. People who by default think, I change things, these are people who perceive themselves as running the world, as it were, and not necessarily in a good way or a bad way. Just if something happens bad to someone else, this step on a crack and you break your mother's back. Oh no, I stepped on the crack, my mother's back broke, I must have done it somehow, and there is this sense of self magically causing things to change that little children have, that can somehow make them feel guilty and responsible for things that they had nothing to do with. And the adults around them sometimes won't even see that because the adults around them know the kid didn't do that, but the child doesn't know that. And so all of us develop, some psychologists might call it a locus of control. And that is this: I imagine that most things happen because I did something. Or I imagine that most things happen because somebody else did something. The person who settles there, they can become a very passive person. You know, well, I I applied for the job, but they didn't like me. Well, I tried, but it didn't work. They got in my way. It was, and so some people have such an external sense of control that they see their own involvement in life as being really a much more passive response to the things everybody else is doing. And there are some people who settle into that chaotic, I don't know what's going on. And these are people who really don't seem to have any sense of control at all. Doesn't matter. Well, should I try harder? Well, I don't know. What good will that do? Well, is somebody going to help you? I don't know. I don't know what can be help. And the people have this chaotic sense. They're people who think that things change just because they do. There's no real rhyme or reason for it. Consequently, there's nothing to ask anyone else to do or nothing for me to do. But anyway, we basically find ourselves approaching life in a way where we have this sense of control, causality, that things happen because something made them happen. It was either me or someone else or something I can't identify. And life tends to take on a focus of one of those as the major thing. Very few people retain a sense of, well, there's a lot of different causes, and in each case, I really need to kind of have a sense of it and verify it and recognize it if I can't verify it. Maybe I don't know, and maybe I'll know later. But most of us settle in a sense of causality. Then, after we do that, we then begin to observe things in three specific ways for meaning and understanding. And these three specific ways we'd adopt at such a young age that it becomes something we habitually do for the rest of our lives, even if we add other ways of knowing things. And that is this: general observations. The child is looking at things, sees things, notices things. Huh, how about that? Never noticed that over there before. It's been there all the time. It continues to be there. And they notice various things. So our lives get filled with what I would call general observations. Then there's also other things that stand out to us and that begin to resonate with us. And that is things that revolve around changes. And this might be we observe something where things around it are changing and it causes that thing also to change with it, or things around it are changing and it remains the same in spite of the fact that things around it are changing, or we see something change and it causes other things to change and as a result, or we see something change and yet in spite of the fact it changed, it was ineffective in changing anything else. And so the second way we tend to observe things as we're growing up is we notice things in the process of changes, either changes happening to a thing or changes happening in a thing. And then we see the results and the outcome of that or the lack of it. So we make observations in general. We make observations in a context of change. And the third thing that becomes a major way of understanding us and understanding everything is this: we see other people. It's like dogs. I take the dogs for a walk. The dog will ignore this and that, and they won't ignore the bushes, but they ignore almost everything. If the cars drive by, the dogs will ignore that. If we drive by an empty lot, it's an empty lot. If we walk by a house, it's just a house. But let there be another dog. Oh my goodness, the dogs are both aware of it, barking, trying to communicate. They just notice all the dogs, And we human beings, we're social like that too. We notice the people. And the truth is, as we grow up, we watch other people, and we watch other people use things, deal with things. We watch other people deal with us. We find ourselves dealing with other people. And we see that people seem to apply a significant purpose to the things they do. And from this, we try to make observations and learn. Basically, what we're discovering is this: that my understanding of everything is built upon some general observations, Observations of seeing that thing that I understand as things in a context of change, and understanding something in terms of the way people relate to that thing. Now, this is true of everything. It's true of, like, this is a capo, it's a guitar capo. I've made observations about it in using it, just general observations. I've observed the changes it makes to the way my guitar plays, and I've watched other people use them. And those are the three ways that I have come to an understanding of just what a capo really is. Now, those three building blocks, general observation, observations of things in a context of change, and other people in terms of my relationship to them or relating to them, whether I have a relationship with them or not. These are the three building blocks that allow me to make sense of anything and everything. And guess what? This is how you came to make sense of yourself. As you're growing up, you noticed a couple of things about yourself that stood out and resonated with you. You also watched things about you change and the effect it had on you, or you watched yourself change in ways you thought you saw yourself change, perhaps, or actually did change. And then you saw the impact that did or didn't have on others. And some of that stood out to you, this context of change. And you also saw other people relating either to others or relating to you. And somehow that resonated and it told your story to you of who you are. What I'm saying is this, that between your sense of what causes things to be what they are, what causes things to change, what causes things to be meaningful, internal, external, unidentified. These three major ways of dealing with reality and the fact that we learn what things are and what their significance is by building upon them, by observing them in general, observing them in a context of change, and observing them in terms of how other people relate to them. This is how you learn who you are. But what if your general observations weren't nice, weren't accurate, weren't fair? What if the changes were unlucky, unfortunate, didn't work out well, turned out to be terribly unfortunate, or were involved in causes you weren't aware of, so you don't really know the impact of actual changes or the failure of impact? Maybe there were changes you didn't see. And none of that, but the people relating to you, maybe they weren't the kindest. Maybe they weren't the nicest. Maybe they weren't the firmest. Maybe they weren't the most disciplined. Maybe they weren't things that would have helped you better. Nonetheless, we're running out of time, and I'm going to want to continue this topic. But basically, the question is this: who do you think you are? Well, you do have a concept of yourself, and you came to that concept through a process of natural human development that included making sense of just the sensory perception, making sense of how things operate and organize in the world through causality, and then making those three general areas of observations. And I'm going to talk more about this next time that we get together and talk about how this gets built upon it and how we can begin to identify the major general observations, the major changes, and the major influences in people in our lives that have caused us to take on a sense of ourselves, and so we can re-examine those observations, re-examine those changes, and re-examine those people to find out, am I being fair with myself? Am I giving myself the best fighting chance to know who I am? Or am I shooting myself in the foot? Am I cutting myself off? Am I allowing myself to be who I really can be? Am I allowing myself to be on that trajectory of personal development? And we'll talk about more about how that works the next time that we get together. We have just like a minute or two, and I'm wondering, Joey, were there any other comments that came in that this might be a good time to grab one or not? And maybe this was one of those mesmerizing moments where what's he talking about? Sounds interesting. But anyhow, I want to continue talking about this, and that's the question. Just who do you think you are? And hopefully the person you learn to discover that you are is someone who you can now understand or come to understand why God loves you so much, why loving is just such a wonderful thing for you to do, and why being loved is such an honest and wonderful thing for others to do in terms of the way they relate to you. And we'll talk about that next time. In the meantime, this is Bob Greaves, the Unconventional Pastor. We'll see you then. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, stick around. In just a few moments, Dr. Jones will be up on stage challenging all of our brains. Can you wait? I can't. Stick around.